Hey, this is Rodney Hudson. You're listening to the Silver and Black Today.
This is the Silver and Black Today podcast, your source for Raiders news and information. Now, here's your hosts, swaggering boisterously.
All right, happy Friday, Raider Nation. It is the Friday before. It's eve of the cut down to the 53-man roster, and that means something very significant. That means we're almost at the regular season. 10 days until the Raiders kick off against the Los Angeles Rams in Oakland on Monday Night Football. Hi, everybody. This is Scott Gulbransen. I am the host here with the Silver and Black Today podcast. Also, don't forget, we have a radio show every Sunday morning from 8 to 10 a.m. on CBS Sports Radio 1140 a.m. here in Las Vegas. But if you're outside Las Vegas, like many of our listeners are, don't fret. You can actually listen to us live anywhere using the radio.com app. It's a pretty killer app. You can listen to actually sports stations from all over the country. But if you go there and you search Sports Radio 1140, you will find us. And you can listen to us on Sunday. We can be now a part of your Sunday ritual. And we got a great show coming up this weekend. Actually, we'll be talking about the same subject we're talking about tonight, which is what happened with cuts and waiver wire moves or whatever. Gilbert Manzano, writer with the Las Vegas Review-Journal, he covers the Raider. He's been up at camp all preseason, and he'll join us to talk about that if there's any surprises, and also we'll touch on Khalil Mack. Then in our second hour, we're going to be joined by Mick Akers of the Las Vegas Sun. Of course, the Raiders today, or I should say not today, this week, presented a parking plan, and it created some ruckus here in Las Vegas and amongst fans who aren't happy with the Raiders and their initial parking plan. It's not the full plan, it's an initial plan. So we'll talk to Mick about that. And then speaking of the stadium, we are going to be joined by Stadium Authority Board member Tommy White. Tommy's also the head of the local 872 Laborers Union here in Las Vegas. They are a sponsor of this podcast and of our video show as well on Sundays. He will join us. He'll give us a progress report on the construction of the stadium. And I've gotten a lot of emails over the last couple weeks because we haven't talked a lot about it on the radio show. So Tommy's going to be in the studio, on Sunday. He'll tell us where exactly they're at. He'll give us the ins, the outs of what work is being done. Then he will also, with me and Matt Gutierrez, our co-host on the radio show, he will join us in a debate on the parking thing because actually him and I think very similar. Matt, on the other hand, is not as happy with the parking plan as some of us. So we'll have a very spirited debate on that one. So make sure you join us 8 to 10 on Sunday for the Silver and Black Today on CBS Sports Radio 1140 a.m. in Las Vegas. Now, also, don't forget, check out the website, silverandblacktoday.com. That's what started it all for us. Great content there, including content from Hayden Nadolny, who's our senior NFL columnist, and then our senior NFL analyst, who is just fantastic, and I know all the listeners out there and in Raider Nation know of him, and his name is Chris Reed, and Chris Reed is joining us tonight. He is my co-host for this podcast. How you doing down in Arizona tonight, Chris?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. You ready for a mini free agency?
I know. It's going to be crazy, but you know what? I love this time. You know, the draft and all that stuff is great and all, but this means we're one step closer to football. And yes, it's the junior circuit, but the college guys kicked off tonight. And just having football on TV that I can go to sleep to as my lullaby is great. And we're just around the corner from the Raiders season and from pro football, which is also great. So what we want to do tonight, Chris, of course, is jump in and start to talk about the 53-man roster. Now, we've seen people putting out 53-man roster predictions for weeks and weeks and weeks. I've resisted doing that. I just don't see a need for it. People like to do that to fill the content funnel, and that's okay. Got no problem with the way people do their business. But for us, we wanted to wait till we really got towards the end of the preseason. And so here we are. You and I were texting quite a bit last night during the game as we watched. You know, a lot of people think the game's boring, but we're watching a bunch of guys compete for those last 3, 4, maybe 5 spots, Chris. And I think we saw some performances last night that are going to factor into who we pick on this 53-man roster.
Yeah, I always say, don't put too much stock into those last preseason game performances because of the level of competition. And then the first thing you do when you put your roster together is, grade people because of that last preseason game.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, of course, Keon Hatcher last night was a perfect example of that. What an amazing performance. And I'm happy for the young man. I think it was too little too late, but we'll get to that here in a second. So, Chris, let's start with the offense. I really don't know who's going to be the starting quarterback. Do you?
No, I mean, they haven't played Carr very much. You figured they're probably going to cut him, right?
Yeah, so we know Derek Carr. And then last night, we ran a story on silverandblacktoday.com right after the game with really the lead being the performance of E.J. Manuel. Now, last night, you and I were chatting back and forth, and there were a couple times where I was surprised that Manuel still hesitated. For a guy of his experience, his age, and being a former starter in the NFL, it still surprised me. But overall, Chris, he really came out on a mission last night and took that job.
Yeah, he still had a few of those throws that were, behind the receiver or whatever, and he definitely hesitated at times. But without being able to see the whole field, it could have just been a receivers not getting open versus man coverage or something. But Emmanuel certainly looked in control last night.
He did. What did you see, though, that's still, besides the errant throws and what I mentioned, which is kind of some hesitation, especially on the one down where he could have, I don't know that he would have made a first down, but he could have made it close by running. He hesitated and had a little hitch twice and ended up getting sacked. What else did you see that maybe still gave you some concerns, even though it's 99%, I think, that he's won that job?
Just how many times he had to escape the pocket. It would be easier to know if we could see the whole field. Was his first and second reads available to him, or did he hesitate throwing into windows? But without seeing the whole field, you're not going to know.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so the quarterback, we got that. We got Carr. We got Manuel as his backup, and then we'll see. I don't see them carrying anybody else, obviously, Connor Cook, unless somebody hits the waiver wire. That's too good to pass up, and I don't think there's anybody like that out there. It's going to be those two guys. Okay, let's move. We'll stay on the offensive side of the ball. We'll get through offense, and then we'll go to defense. Let's go to running back, Chris. Now, if you look at this group, I think, the talk of the whole preseason, as it should be, was Chris Warren and his performance. How do you see, who are your four guys at the running back position, at the halfback position that you see making this roster?
I've got five technically because I'm counting Keith Smith, the fullback, as a back, but I've got Lynch, Martin, Jalen Richard, and Chris Warren.
Yep, and that's exactly the same list I had with Keith Smith. I just broke him out separately as a fullback. So if you look at running back position, you have Lynch, Martin, Richard, Warren, and Smith. I can't see. I was asking you last night, right? That boy, they're playing Warren a lot, which was surprising to me because even Seth Roberts, and we'll get to the wide receivers in a moment, was held out, which made you think, wow, this kid's going to make the roster again. What with Warren, he really got a lot of action, and I thought you brought up a good point on why that may have been.
Yeah, maybe they just wanted to see what he would look like in a full game, worth of carries. Would he be able to wear down that defense, and look better late in games?
Yeah, and I was impressed with him last night for what he did. He didn't rack up the yards like he did in previous three games that made him the talk of the league. But what I liked was what Gruden has been saying for the last 2 weeks about Warren's progression. And that is, we have to see what he does away from the ball. He has to improve at that. And last night, in several situations, I pointed one of them out in the article I wrote last night. But if you look at what he did, Chris, that was very encouraging to see what he was able to do, blocking and making sure that he was in position to help his team when he wasn't running the ball.
Yeah, I made one clip where Warren stepped up and it looked like the right guard had like a bad read and there was a free rusher coming at. I believe it was Manuel still at that time, and Warren stepped up and picked up that blitz, and they were able to complete like a 14-yard pass. I think that one was even to Hatcher. It was,
and that's actually the one I highlighted in the story on silverandblacktoday.com. So, yeah, so seeing him progress, is he there? Is he all the way there where Gruden wants to give him more time perhaps in a regular season game? We'll see. We'll see how fast his progression is, but there's no denying that this kid worked hard. He looks a lot like his dad. back there, and playing in Seattle last night. I'm sure there was some flashbacks for the Seahawks fans to see Chris Warren III running back there for the Raiders. So that seems good. I mean, we also have DeAndre Washington. I have him on IR clearly because he is, and so he'll hold on there, and we'll see what happens after that. But I don't know unless something happened that we don't know about. I think this is pretty solid and isn't going to change much. And I think that this is a consensus amongst other Raiders media, fan sites, and everyone else that we follow here, silverblacktoday.com. So that makes sense. So again, Lynch, Martin, Richard, Warren, and Smith. Okay, so now we go to tight end. So tight end, again, wasn't a focus last night, except for some guys who we won't see much of anymore. But if you look at the locks I have this time, Chris, I have Lee Smith, Jared Cook, and Derek Carrier at tight end.
Yeah, that's exactly what I have. I was kind of considering maybe putting Paul Butler in there as a fourth. I think they might look at him at practice squad, mainly because of how many 3 tight end sets they carry. But I ended up thinking that they were going to end up keeping Connor Cook, so I went with 3 quarterbacks instead. But I could see them carrying 4 tight ends with as many 3 tight end looks as they went with. So
you think, so now we're going back to quarterback, but you just said that, and sorry I didn't ask you when we were going through that. I guess I assumed that you weren't going to have Connor Cook on there. So you think there's a shot that they keep him on that practice squad and not give up yet on developing him?
He did have that Lions game where he looked really good, in control. And I mean, if Derek Carr does go down, yeah, EJ is going to be the backup, but you still need a backup behind the backup,
Yeah.
A guy that you can count on, worst case scenario, that could actually come in and run the offense.
Yeah, and I don't think they would have any problem getting him through waivers there too. So interesting take on that. I'm not there on that, but we'll see what goes on. I know that going into the season and clearly when he was coming out in the draft class, John Gruden really liked him. So at tight end, we both have Smith, Cook, and Carrier, and then you have possibly Butler on the practice squad, which I thought he had a great preseason. He showed a lot, and to your point about having 3 tight end sets, somebody goes down with an injury, you're going to have a guy there to step in at least for a week or 2 at a time. So that makes a lot of sense. And if I was betting on it, I would bet on that as well. Okay, now we look at the interior offensive line. Chris, who do you got there? Who's going to make it? We heard today already that John Feliciano, through media reports, looks like he's going to be the backup to Rodney Hudson. Who else do you have on the interior?
I mean, of course, you got KO, Gabe, and Hudson, and I've got Feliciano being the main swing guy. And then I think Ian Silberman will make the squad, too.
Yeah, I do, too.
I carried 9 offensive linemen. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's okay. No, I agree with you. I carried 9 as well, and I have Silberman there as 2. I just think that makes all sense. He played solid, and to me, he's a guy that they continue to like. And you know what? He worked hard. I mean, if you saw him play at all, and what his kind of makeup is, I think that they like him, and I think he fits in with Gruden in that system. So I agree with you there. So we have Kalechi, Gabe Jackson, Rodney Hudson, of course, John Feliciano, and Ian Silberman. Now we go outside to the tackle position, which of course we've spent the entire preseason talking about. No surprises there for me. I have, of course, Penn, Miller, and Parker, and then I have David Sharp as the 4th.
That's exactly what I got too.
And so everybody knows, we did not share with each other beforehand. All right. So, and then you saw Parker. I mean, I thought last night it was interesting. They played Parker at left tackle a lot. At times he looked okay. At other times he did not. But again, he's a guy they've looked at for the right side the whole time. So it was interesting to see them kind of give him some reps over there just in case they need him at some point.
Yeah, especially as much as they talk about, wanting to keep Colton Miller on the left side so they can develop him. And then, David Sharp, they were moving back and forth. You'd think they'd want to get good looks at right tackle just in case, Penn continues to struggle out there, they would have somebody else to plug in.
Yeah, I think that they must think that Parker is fine at right, and he doesn't need a lot of work there. But it was interesting. But I kind of like that. That's what I like about this coaching staff, though, Chris, is that they're willing to kind of move things around, try guys out, and see what happens. Now, when you get into the regular season and there's games and wins on the line, I'm sure they're not going to be experimenting unless they have to, and that would be a bad sign. But you got to like that in this coaching staff, that they're willing to try stuff.
Yeah, it's just a little concerning to me just how late in the off season it is, because the game's coming up in 10 days. You would think that they would have that kind of figured out by now. You
would think so. You'd sound like a coach. But that's true, and we'll see what happens. But okay, so we had Penn, Miller, Parker, and Sharp. Now we'll go to wide receiver, and of course last night, watching the post-game press conference, John Gruden, whether or not it's authentic, which he tends to be an authentic guy, so you have to believe it was, pretty emotional. He was talking about some of these guys who really went out last night and played hard. And at this wide receiver position, we talked about Keon Hatcher and the huge night that he had. But when you look at that group, I just don't see him making that, because primarily if Marcel Aitman wasn't there, maybe we're talking a different story. But who do you have as your 5 or 6 wide receivers?
I'm carrying 6. I've got Cooper, Nelson, Martavis Bryant, Seth Roberts, Dwayne Harris, and Marcel Aitman.
All right. That's exactly what I have. But, if not for Aitman, I think it could be very easily have been Hatcher, correct?
I think so, and I think I heard Raider Nation's collective heartbreak when John Gruden said Roberts was going to be on the roster this year, because I was thinking that it would come down to Roberts, Aitman, and Hatcher with the 3 touchdown performance he put up.
Well, though, I agree with you. We talked about it all offseason, and I was one of the people, not because I was terribly down on the guy. I just looked at him and what they were doing at the position and what happened last year. And I'll get back to that in a second, because what happened last year actually should have very little to do with this year. Is he played really well in the preseason, and he's always been a good blocker, Chris.
Yeah, he's probably the best run blocking wide receiver that's on the roster. So yeah. I could see where, as much as they want to run the ball, that they could, they would certainly highlight, that ability.
And the thing with Seth Roberts, too, is, remember, look at some of the guys that have come out from the team last year. We've had a lot of turnover with this roster. As we go through this list, you can see some of it with the free agent acquisitions. But Seth Roberts played under a different system. He was in a dysfunctional situation last year, so he didn't perform well. I see players all the time who turn it around because they have the right support system, they have the right coaching staff. And there's been a theme amongst Raider Nation over the last couple weeks, at least when I'm scrolling through Twitter as I do, and that is coaching matters. And there's no doubt about it. You've said it several times, even on some of the breakdowns that you've done on video, is that it's amazing how guys can turn it around and perform and really surprise us because of who they're playing for and the system they're put in.
Yeah, playing devil's advocate for, all the fans, I think with Roberts, it's not so much the lack of opportunity. It was just the drops, the fumbles, really the ball security. It seemed like it was always a big third down. It would hit him right in the hands. And I kind of think that's why more people were down on him than just the overall production. But he's certainly going to have a chance with Gruden's offense to get some balls in space and see what he can do with it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times there are guys who just don't have great hands. That happens. They usually don't make NFL rosters. At the same time, Chris, I think focus, right? And again, that goes back to coaching. It goes back to culture. I keep talking about that word, culture, and I think that with John Gruden there and with all of the coaching staff that he brought in and the way that mood has seemingly changed around the entire organization, at least on the field, it matters. You got a guy who's dropping the ball. You're right, and people did. Watching him last year, it was incredibly frustrating as a fan, I'm sure, to watch a guy have a ball hit him right in the hands and just drop it like they're stone, right? So, but I love that focus, and hopefully he continues that and is able to take it into the regular season. Okay, well, we're going to go on to the defensive side. Before we do that, I just want to mention, as I did in the beginning, and give a thank you to our supporters here on the silverandblacktoday.com. Nobody ever wants to be in trouble with the law, especially when it comes to criminal law. But the reality is things happen. And sometimes you're going to need help. You're going to need help of a criminal defense attorney. It doesn't matter whether it was a serious offense or a DUI. And we're Labor Day weekend, so make sure you don't drink and drive. But when you do that, make sure that you get the best representation you can. And here in Las Vegas, one of our proud sponsors is, of course, the attorney Michael Troiano at TroianoVegasLaw.com. If you need help, if you have a friend, you have a family member who needs legal help, make sure you reach out to them. Go on the web to TroianoVegasLaw.com. Also, you may know the Southern Nevada Laborers are there, the local 872. They're building the new home of the Raiders, the Las Vegas Stadium, but the Southern Nevada Laborers are also making a brighter future possible for men and women all over the valley. The Southern Nevada Laborers will give you the skills you need to be part of the workforce that's strong and committed. Call Southern Nevada Laborers at 702-452-9210. Get the training you need for a brighter future. The Southern Nevada Laborers, 702-452-9210. The local 872, a proud sponsor of Silver and Black Today. Okay. All right, Chris. Now we go on to the defensive side of the ball where there's some interesting, I think, selections here. Not a ton of surprises, but definitely some log jams here. If we look at defensive end, there's some names there, some guys that I would have written off 3 weeks ago that I think are now on that roster. Who you got penciled in as roster locks this season?
I've got Mack on the did not report list, and I carried 5 defensive ends. I've got Irvin, Key, Fadal Brown, Calhoun, and I got Tank Carradine.
Yes. That's good. Yeah, I had the one. I like Calhoun. I think he's deserved to make a roster spot, as has Brown. I just wonder, do they do that, or is it keeping an extra defensive tackle? But you can't argue with your list. One of those guys, Carradine, Brown, or Calhoun, I think could be one of the surprises that is left off. But I agree with you on all of that. And Brown, really, to me, Brown and Calhoun, I mean, Calhoun looks like a different player.
Oh, it's amazing when you put a defensive end at defensive end and you let him just go forward and rush the quarterback, how much better he looks.
Yeah, playing a player at his actual position is advisable, and there is a coaching staff that now believes in that. But yeah, and Tank Carradine, I think that's a name that's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle with all of the other names that have been talked about during the camp and during the preseason, because you had Arden Key there, right, who's just really turned heads and people have been really excited about. But Carradine, again, it's about depth. And having a guy like him, having a guy like Brown, and of course Calhoun there as well is a big deal. And plus, you're going to need them. If you rotate them, you get to that fourth quarter, Chris, and people are tired. You want to have some guys that are fresh.
Yeah, you want the bodies that you can put in there. And with Carradine, I mean, you can put him at defensive end in your base sets, and then he can rotate in as a pass rusher on the interior as well. So I've got him at defensive end because that's where they list him, but you could definitely look at him as a tackle as well. Absolutely.
And if we talk about tackles, you look in there, the 2 rookies, the H&H brothers, as I call them, Maurice Hurst, PJ Hall, of course, have done so well as rookies and even their teammates. I think when you have teammates really talking genuinely and at length about rookies and their work ethic and what they've been able to do to take on a new defensive scheme under Paul Gunther, it says a lot. So you have those 2 guys. I have Justin Ellis. I also had Trayvon Hester, and I have Mario Edwards Jr.
Oh, you got them keeping Edwards Jr.?
I do, although now I'm hearing they're shopping him around. At least some sources are saying that. But that was just my one surprise pick. I don't know that it'll actually happen. I'm lukewarm on it. But whether or not they decide to eject him will be an interesting play. Who you got at that defensive tackle?
Oh, we're on the same page except for Edwards. I've got Ellis, PJ Hall, Mo Hurst, and Trayvon Hester, and that's a long road for how many people were mad about that PJ Hall pick during the draft. Now, if you tried to leave him off, they would think you were an idiot.
It's the interesting thing, Chris, since the draft and the reaction to the draft for the Raiders, the last 4 weeks, I haven't heard a lot of those people complaining about those guys, right? Or guys like, even guys like Colton Miller, who suddenly it's like, wow, Colton Miller's performed well enough, at least in the coach's eyes, that they can move Donald Penn to right tackle. So to me, Raider Nation is the best fan base there is in football and perhaps one of the top in sports, but very emotional fan base. And they were very emotional about the draft. But boy, so far, and I know we got a long way to go, so far that draft is looking better and better each day.
Yeah, it is. Oh, and I would also add, I've got a Vanderdost going to IR, which I'm sure you do as well.
I do, yes. So yes, we'll do that. He's there on IR, and Eddie was a guy coming out of college, despite the negatives with the weight issues and the injury. I was really excited about him, and he came out against that game against Tennessee the first week of the season, and I thought he performed really, really well. And then there was not much after that, whether or not that was all due to health or not. We'll see if he can get healthy, and that's a big if. He might be able to contribute to this team, but now it's really crowded up there in the competition, as John Gruden has done throughout his second tenure with the Raiders. He's created a culture of competition, so it's going to be tough for him to break in. All right, so now we go to the linebackers. Okay, so if we go to middle linebacker, my two picks here, of course, Markel Lee, Derek Johnson. Markel Lee was one of my favorite players, if not the favorite player of the preseason. He really came out. Not only was his effort top notch, but he played well. He plays well in the system, and I think he's due to really have a big season.
Yeah, he was switching out. He was playing base, and then Derek Johnson was coming in the nickel package. And I think it's more Johnson's ability in the nickel package that keeps Lee off the field in that situation.
Right.
So hopefully as the season goes on, I could see him even maybe taking that over from Derek.
Yeah, and when you have a guy like Derek Johnson, I think still has, and back when the Raiders acquired him, you wrote a piece about and broke down the film about how Johnson still had some left in the tank, and I think he does. But boy, if you can develop Markel Lee going into those other packages, then you really have a guy who's set there for the future, and that would be great for this franchise. Okay, now looking at the other linebackers, who you got?
I've got Whitehead, Morrow, Emmanuel Lemur, and I took James Cowser over Cabina. I've got Cabina maybe making the practice squad. He was a real monster last night. He ended up with like 9 tackles. I made a quick clip of a screen pass where he just blew by 3 blockers and just laid the running back out. So it was kind of tough between Cowser and Cabina, but I think they could stick Cabina on practice squad.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm there with you on all those guys. And Cabina, he's one of those guys who you like to see what he did, and he did have a monster game, and he led the team in tackles, did he not, the entire preseason?
I'm pretty sure. I don't have the numbers, but I mean, last night alone he had almost 10 of them, so I'm sure he did. Yeah,
and so I think that those picks that you have at linebacker are pretty solid. I also like Kyle Wilbur. I just think with the way Cabina's come on at the end, it's going to be hard and impossible to keep both those guys. But yes, Lemore, Whitehead, Morrow, definitely fill that out. And so we'll see how that goes. It'll be interesting on that linebacker. But boy, what a difference 14 months make when you're talking about, remember last offseason when there was the Reggie watch, when is Reggie going to sign a linebacker? And now you have, I think, what has developed into a much improved and really could be a strength for this team on the defensive side.
Well, I like how, you go from Jack Del Rio, where you look at they had all their defenders doing, 2 jobs, and then Paul Gunther comes in and says, you're going to do one thing and you're going to do it really well. And I think that goes back to what Reggie was talking about at the draft, when he was like, it was nice to work with coaches that knew exactly what kind of player they wanted.
Yep.
And so they got these guys doing just one thing. They want Lee out there stopping the run. They want Derek Johnson, getting under inside breaking routes, and they're making it really simple for the guys to play fast.
That's so true. And I mean, we even saw that a slight improvement after they said goodbye to Ken Norton Jr. and you went to Pagano, things got simpler, and you saw some improvement in some areas last year. And then now you have a system that really builds to that, and the way this coaching staff has handled those guys on defense, it to me makes the biggest difference in the world. So it's going to be fun to see that. Now, the group that I'm most excited about overall, because I think it's helped those rookies up front that we talked about with Hall, Hurst, and of course when Irvin and Mack are both in there, they will be the monsters that they are, and that is the defensive backfield. Now, if we look at safety first, at safety, here's who I have. I have Carl Joseph, Gilchrist, Eric Harris, and Reggie Nelson. Who you got?
Exact same thing. I should have just started throwing some names in here just so we could have something to actually debate. But well, yeah, that's the exact list I got too.
We had one of our listeners before the show say, I don't know what you guys are going to talk about. It's pretty straightforward who's making the roster. But yeah, I mean, hey, I did have Kyle Wilbur there. So there's the one, even though I think Kowser's a great player too and deserves it. That's the tough thing with the NFL. There's lots of guys who deserve that spot. But there's maybe one little intangible or one key issue that puts the head of the list, and suddenly a guy's gone. Okay, so you have the same guys at safety. Any concerns at that position with those guys? I know some of the holdover guys, Joseph, Nelson. Some Raider fans get down on those guys, but I think they have really shown their ability this year so far to really adapt and under the right system play better ball.
Yeah, the only thing that is interesting is that's the one position it seems in the defense where it's not, we're going to identify one trait that we want somebody to do, because it seemed like they're rolling. They don't have like a predetermined free safety and a strong safety. They're just going to roll the safety down to the strong side of the offense. And I could see where Joseph might be a little better in the box, or Nelson might be a little better in the box, and Gilchrist or Harris kind of playing up high. But as much two safety sets that they're going to and looks that they're going to give, I don't really have a worry about either of them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Okay, so now cornerback, this was a position that when you look at the list, out of the 6 guys that I have, and I'll let you name yours first, but out of the 6 guys that I have, 4 of them were free agent acquisitions. So you tell me who's going to play cornerback for the Raiders come next Monday.
I only have 5. I've got Melvin, Conley, Nelson, Hall, and Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie. I would have Worley on there, but it sounds like he's going to start the season suspended.
Yep.
And then I went with Hall over Hamilton just because of his familiarity with Gunther.
Yes, absolutely. That's a big deal. And I have exactly the same list, but I had Worley on there. That was, of course, before the news in the last about 90 minutes, which has not been confirmed yet, but from all indications, as everyone expected, Daryl Worley's going to be suspended for 4 games. Too bad his name wasn't Urban Meyer. It would have only been 3. But he's going to be out for a while. So we'll see what they do there. And it gives perhaps Nick Nelson the opportunity to get some time in.
Yeah, I mean, it'll definitely give him a chance to develop. He's looked really good in the preseason.
Yeah, he has. It's phenomenal. And so, I mean, again, the thing that has been so impressive to me, even when these guys get beat, like there was last night, you posted a clip, right? And I forgot who the play was now. But it was, you said, hey, it is really a game of inches because the coverage was really good. Do you remember who was it Melvin or who was it?
Oh, it was Pringle.
Oh, it was Pringle who got cut today. But Pringle was actually in good coverage, and the ball literally was maybe an inch above his fingertips where he could have defended it.
Yeah, he stretches out for it, and I mean, if it's 1 inch closer to him, he knocks that ball down. It looks like a great play. Instead, he falls on his face, and the guy, goes untouched for 70 yards, and that's how close it can be sometimes.
Amazing, and he's no longer a Raider. So, but that to me is watching these guys and the way they've been coached by Derek Ansley. We've talked a lot about Ansley because I think the job he's done with this group really is up there with the top jobs so far in this camp and in this preseason. They play the ball. They're near the ball. You're seeing the fundamentals, Chris, come along so much more than what we saw last year. In fact, somebody posted a picture the other day. It's like, this is what it was like last year, and it was just a ridiculous picture of three wideout set. I don't know if it was you or not who posted it, but 3 wideout set, and you had one cornerback over there with 3 guys and nobody else in the area. So the fact that these guys know where they're supposed to play, they're playing to the best of their ability, and they're always around the ball.
It's so much easier when you're asking people to play man coverage too. And you can't scheme with, a stack against man coverage the same way you can with a zone. So that had a lot to do with that, one player on 3, but I'm so excited about the man coverage. I'm a man coverage person. That was part of the draw to the Al Davis Raiders for me.
Oh yeah. That's no doubt about that. So it's good to see it back. Now, the one position, we only have a few left to go over before we move on to some other subjects, but the one position I know that the entire world is really waiting for, because, it's just been such a tough camp and preseason. We got to play some dramatic music because everyone wants to know your pick for long snapper.
It can't be John Kondo for the first time, and I don't even remember how long. I mean, Andrew DePola. I'm probably killing his last name. That's how new he is, but
yep,
he's the only one on the roster.
He's the only one. It's nice. You get out of that last preseason game as a young player, I should say, and you look at the depth chart, the flip card from that night, and you're the only name there. You got to feel good about that. You got nothing to worry about unless you get hurt. So that's pretty good. Now, punter, let's talk about Johnny Townsend, because he's going to be the punter. There's no drama there. I think this is going to be tough for some Raider fans because he is Johnny Townsend. By watching him throughout the course of the preseason and watching film from him from college, he is a directional kicker. He is not a big leg. The Raiders go back Shane Leckler and, of course, Marquette King. This is not that kind of guy.
I've got them cutting Townsend and bringing Leckler back.
Ray Guy
that would make people happy, anyways.
Ray Guy, if you just give him 12 packs of cigarettes.
Well, the Texans actually cut Leckler, so he is a free agent right now.
Oh my gosh! Don't start that one.
Yeah, I know. I wanted to put something about it out there just to see what would happen, but yeah, Townsend, he's definitely a directional guy, and Gruden even talked about it during the draft that he didn't want to see balls go into the middle of the field where a returner had a whole field to work with. They want to pin him in a corner and rely on the accuracy. And I mean, with Raider fans, we've been spoiled with Leckler, and even King had a big leg, so seeing a guy that only punts the ball 45 yards, it makes him look weak. It's just because we're used to those guys nailing it 70 yards every time.
No, that's true. And the only thing, my biggest disappointment with Townsend has not necessarily been that. I knew he didn't have the monster leg, and it's not impressive to me. It's like a home run hitter who's going to strike out 220 times, right? It's not something that I'm willing to watch as a trade-off. But there have been times when he's had the opportunity where you need some more distance, and he doesn't seem to get it. So you hope that over time he'll be able to develop into a little more of an in-between, where when you need him to get you out of a position and perhaps put a little more leg behind it, he's going to be able to do it. But we should see, right? I mean, it's one of those things that Raider fans are going to have to get used to, and it might change the way in which John Gruden uses his special teams.
And it could definitely play into some of those field position decisions as well. If he does turn out to be really accurate with those corner kicks, we might see some more punts, on the plus side of 50, where our defense is getting on the field inside the 5. But yeah, those times that you're backed up, there was one last night that I was really hoping he could get it back to like the 30 or the 20, and I think it barely made it to the plus side 45. So. Yeah. Those days of watching that punt just go over people's head, the way Leckler used to do it, it's not going to happen with him.
No, it's not. And but I think it's an underrated part of the field position game is when you have a guy who can stick it inside the 5 there, and especially when you have a stout defense and you have guys like Khalil Mack and you have guys like Bruce Irvin and the rest. And it helps you because you can actually create that into great positive field position on the offensive side of the ball and make it a little easier on your offense to put some points on the board. So that'll be good. Now at kicker.
Yeah, it looks like the guy that sounded like they just brought in as a camp leg, Nugent's gonna be the guy, with Pinheiro probably ending up on IR.
Yeah, it's curious with Pinheiro that the injury doesn't seem to have gotten any better. So you have to wonder how long they stick with him. I guess it depends on how Nugent does. And I mean, he's a wily veteran, so he's been around a lot. And it's better than, I think, going in with somebody that was unproven. Although I guess there would be some Tavecchio folks out there who would argue that it might have been better to keep him. But I think they made the right move, knowing that Gruden likes the veteran, if you will. We'll see how that goes, and we'll see. It's a completely new special teams unit, and we'll see how it all works out. Because that sometimes can be underrated. I know nobody likes to talk about it. I don't like to talk about it, but when you're playing that field position game, as you said, Chris, it does make a difference a lot of the times.
Yeah, and some of the Nugent thing where they let Tavecchio go was because Tavecchio was left-footed and Pinheiro was right-footed, and they didn't want to keep switching Townsend back and forth with his holds, so they brought in a right-footed kicker. So that had something to do with it too. Oh,
absolutely. Yeah, no, that's true. So that's good. Okay, so we've rounded out that roster. Of course, you had on the did not report list Khalil Mack, which we're going to talk about here in a second, and then suspension list we have Daryl Worley, IR, Obi Melifonwu, he's still there, Vander Does, and DeAndre Washington. So is there anybody out there? I mean, we don't know who's going to be on the waiver wire, but if the Raiders were going to make a move, if a guy comes available, what position is most in flux where you could see them upgrading with somebody on the waiver wire?
God, it's so hard because you tend to kind of overvalue your own position, but I could see if, like, an offensive tackle, somebody that they consider, a solid vet, especially if they have a history with Tom Cable, I could see somebody coming in. It's kind of hard because then you got to turn around and take somebody off the list, and I'm not really sure. Maybe they would let David Sharp go, if they had a solid option at right tackle. But they're going to make some changes, but it's really hard to look at the list and decide who you would get rid of to bring somebody in.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that there's not a lot of areas where I think they feel like they need significant upgrades unless you get some crazy person on the wire, which I don't think is going to happen. So I agree with you there. And they made some good moves. I mean, you go to Rogers Camardi in the last 2 weeks. That's the kind of move that I would expect them to make. It was a great upgrade for them and a guy to bring in that might have been later on, but because of the timing, they were able to get him even before they got to the end of the preseason.
Yeah, and he's a guy that I've really liked for a long time. I mean, he's a over 6 foot tall, long corner. He fits the man coverage scheme perfectly. They did talk about him having to learn their technique, which I don't think would be too difficult for him. He's been in the league over 10 years, so Cromartie was a really good pickup.
Yeah, it really was, and I like what this is how I build my fantasy team. By the way, I'm a waiver wire guy. And so I've built teams that way, and yes, I'm not a professional general manager, but I like what Reggie McKenzie has done and what John Gruden has done to find guys that fit the role and fit the mold that they're looking for, because it's something that has helped this team thus far. So, all right, well, that closes out the 53-man roster. You know what? 2 weeks ago, I wasn't so sure about this, but when I told you earlier today, I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'll put it together. I'll just react here. And then I sat down and did it. And I was like, wow, this is pretty straightforward. We'll see if there's any surprises here tomorrow, but I doubt it. But we'll see. I mean, if there is, I think the only place it could be is maybe at wide receiver, and then maybe at linebacker, but that's about it.
Or maybe they'll come to their senses and get rid of Doug Martin.
You mean the MVP? Come on, man. No. Yeah, Doug Martin. We'll see. I'm interested to see what he's going to be able to do. But they have Chris Warren there and a different type of runner. But if Martin does not pull the load they need him to, he could very well find himself gone, and Chris Warren taking over some of those snaps with Washington, perhaps them and coming off and being the fourth guy, even though he's really similar to Richard. So we'll see. It'll be interesting. Okay, so now of course, the talk of the day was what happened in Los Angeles with the Rams and the big contract. So if we look at this, Chris, we look at Aaron Donald and what he was able to do today with the Rams and what it means for the Oakland Raiders and Khalil Mack. Now, a lot of folks have said all along, including my co-host on the radio show, McAteer, is that one side was, the Mack folks and the Donald folks were waiting for each other to sign first so that they could set the market. Well, guess what? Aaron Donald just set the market, and it's a whopper.
Yeah, he got like $87 million guaranteed, didn't he?
Yes, $87 million guaranteed. It was
like 6 years, 120 or something like that.
It's 135, $87 million guaranteed. It's 7-year deal.
Nice. I don't know. I mean, obviously, as far as the agents and the numbers go, it's certainly going to help them, have a parameter to go off of. But I don't know that they were necessarily waiting, for that to happen. But hopefully it gets Mack in here before week 1.
Well, and it's interesting if you look at this guaranteed money situation. According to our source, Roster Management Systems, if you look at the most guaranteed money of all the players in the NFL, of course you have Aaron Rodgers, who just signed his new deal, $103 million guaranteed. 103. Just give me 10% of that, by the way. Matt Ryan at $100 million. Matthew Stafford at $92 million. Then you have Aaron Donald at $87 million, which is exactly the same guaranteed money that Andrew Luck has in his contract. So, holy moly. I mean, you're now having a defensive player up in that quarterback echelon when it comes to money. This is not only a game changer for Khalil Mack and the Raiders because they're going to have to work around this type of number, but man, for the league, this is a huge jump when it comes to paying a defensive player, a defensive star, the same kind of money you'd pay a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, and if you listen to how people think about the important positions, it's getting a quarterback and then getting after a quarterback. So it certainly makes sense.
It does. And I mean, this comes after, of course, Derek Carr's deal before last season. And some of the conversation, though, Chris, I don't understand. I think there's been some – look, you have salary cap. You have limitations. Not every team has the same amount of money. Not everybody's Stan Kroenke. Not everybody's in the Los Angeles market. I get that. But they all have to work under the same limitations when it comes to salary cap. But I don't understand this whole Mark Davis doesn't have the money stuff, because that's not what it's about. I think there's a really big fundamental misunderstanding by the general fan of how contracts work, how you can structure them so that you can fit a guy in at a seemingly massive amount of money under a contract.
Well, and the thing that people look at is guaranteed money, and they automatically assume it's a signing bonus, because it's the signing bonus you have to put in escrow, if I'm right.
That's correct.
A lot of times, Reggie McKenzie ties the guaranteed money to like roster bonuses that he just guarantees. Like he'll guarantee the first 2 of a 4-year deal or something like that. And that's where your guaranteed money can come from. And during the whole stadium process, Mark Davis constantly talked about how he had $500 million for his stadium. So I don't think coming up with, $80-90 million to pay Khalil Mack would really be all that difficult, even though they could structure it so he doesn't have to, come out of pocket with that whole number.
Well, and that's true. And I was telling somebody today in a conversation, said, look, understand that this franchise is in a different position than it was 2 years ago. It is now has a new home. It has a stadium that's being built. It's being paid for in part with tax dollars from hotel taxes here in Clark County, Nevada. But the value of the franchise, and oh, by the way, the revenue that this is why they had to get out of Oakland. It wasn't because they didn't like Oakland or that Oakland wasn't a good place for a football team. It was because they couldn't make money in the piece of junk stadium in Oakland that they were playing in. They could not make revenue. They didn't have the luxury box. They didn't have the size. They didn't have all the stuff that actually creates big revenue. They couldn't sell PSLs, right? So PSLs is money right to the bottom line. So as the Raiders move into their new stadium, Chris, they can take that PSL money and the money they had to borrow from Bank of America for their portion of the stadium, they almost have paid off. So I think people, from an economic standpoint, and believe me, I'm no economic wizard, okay? But from an economic standpoint, this team is in a different position now, and it's going to be in an even better position 2 years. So when you structure a contract and you're talking about, and you hit it on the head, which is it can be roster bonuses. Guaranteed money can come in many, many forms, not just a bonus up front. So with Khalil Mack, just like they did with Derek Carr, and not a lot of people looked into this, is they can give him a lot more guaranteed money in 2 years when they're here. And oh, by the way, he doesn't pay 13% income tax like he will in California. So if I'm the player, I'm willing to take that. It doesn't have to be a bonus up front. And that is a big deal. And I hope that people understand. And I hope, frankly, that those of us in the media do a better job of explaining to people how those contracts work.
Well, the other thing I would add to the PSLs is they had issues at times getting naming rights for the Coliseum.
Yes.
Just getting money out of naming rights. The stadium in Las Vegas, what I've read is they're going to have people lining up to give them money for naming rights for just sections of that stadium. So, I mean, Mark Davis is about to just be flowing in money. They can certainly post-date, any check they need to post-date.
No, well said. And I think, the timing, I had a good friend who's a big Raider fan DM me last night and say, hey, you know what? He'll be there by Saturday. Well, and you know what? The Donald thing, he obviously kind of knew what was happening there. And he said, but he'll be there. He'll be there Saturday. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know about Saturday. I think you have a 5-day period here where he's got to get in there or he won't make it for week one. Whether he plays in week one anyway is going to be in flux. We'll see, because he's got to come in. And even if he's been studying and people have been slipping him stuff about the system, he's still going to need some time to get into to full game shape and play. But I just think that a lot of the angst and the frustration, and I get it from a fan's perspective, right? You want your best guys there. And if they're not there and they're holding out, you get worried. Then you had all this just nonsense about trades. Not that people didn't offer trades. People call teams all the time and ask about the availability of a player. It does not mean that the team's going to trade them. But I just think that either way you look at it, Khalil Mack has to be a Raider for the next 2, possibly 3 years. And so the fact that they're maybe going to get closer to getting a deal done, of course, people are reading into the tweets that Khalil Mack has had about missing being on the field. And then, of course, reports tonight that he's leaving and he's on his way out there. Who knows if there's any truth to that. But Chris, I think either way you look at it, unless he's insane and is going to give up all that money, he's going to be on the field for the Raiders this year. If they don't do something, he's going to get tagged next year and he's going to play. So if you're a Raider fan tonight and you were angsty and you were nervous about this, should you feel better?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's not the NBA where, players kind of can just play out their contract and walk away. The Raiders have him under contract this year. They can franchise him. And then when it comes to any trades, you'll know Khalil Mack is going to be traded, because the first thing you're going to see is that he has permission to negotiate with other teams.
Yep.
And his agent is definitely going to want that news out there. So teams start lining up to start bidding for him. So you're going to hear all about it. It's not going to come out of the blue. You'll know he would be being traded. But it doesn't sound like the Raiders are even, they're taking phone calls, but they have really no interest in it whatsoever.
No, and I've seen some fans say, listen, trade him, because you know what? We don't want this team to be in cap hell like it was, of course, with all due respect, after Al Davis had kind of lost the way. And but I think, again, you're missing the fact here, and that is structuring the contract. Okay, so you don't have to go into salary cap hell. Of course, there are things you need to worry about. But again, to me, if you're the Raiders, Khalil Mack is a Derek Carr on the defensive side of the ball. And now that the market has been set, that's the price you pay, at least somewhere in that range, to keep a guy like that. And this is a guy that you build around, and they have been building around, to create a defense that can win you a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, Derek Carr is the most important person on the roster, but Khalil Mack is the best player on the roster.
Oh yeah.
And then he's already counting for, almost $14 million on the cap this year. So even if that number does jump to, 22 or 24, you're only talking about having to find an extra $8 to $10 million worth of cap room, which Reggie McKenzie, could probably do in his sleep.
No doubt. So it'll be interesting. I think if you're a Raiders fan, you should sit back and just relax and realize that he'll be on the field. If it's not week one, it will be soon after. But it's hard to hold out and not accept that $918,000 paycheck for a game if you're Khalil Mack, even if you do want a new contract and you want to be recognized as one of the best players in the game, if not the best, then I think fans need to just chill out a little bit and realize it'll get done. And I do think, I really think in my heart of hearts, Chris, that they will get this deal done. And they will build it so that it is very lucrative for him after the next 2 years when they're in Nevada, where you have a much happier and much easier tax situation for him, and he will have a very large home here in Las Vegas.
And one he'll have for the next 7 or 8 years.
That's right. And but we're looking forward to it. I think they'll get it done. So, but that's. Boy, anything else, Chris, that's out there with this team coming up here as they make some decisions over the next few days, getting ready for week 1?
Honestly, I haven't even been thinking about week 1 yet. I'm still all, excited for this mini free agency because there always seems to be, one name that you didn't even think of and a player that you really liked that ends up getting bumped for him, So I'm still excited about that. And then week 1, God, it is kind of scary to know that both Sue and Donald are going to be on the field at the same time. KO, Gabe, and Hudson are really going to earn their money that week.
They are, and it's going to be interesting to see. I think we'll know really quickly where the tackle situation is after that game as well, because there's going to be a whole heck of a lot of pressure. I think that's a tough game for the Raiders to win, to be frank, but it is at home. There's going to be a lot of hype, and if Khalil Mack does play in that game, that could change a little bit of the dynamic too, I think, get his team really excited and get folks hyped up for that too. But it should be exciting. And, of course, we're going to be talking about that game next week on our Sunday show. This Sunday, again, we'll be talking with Gilbert Manzano from the Las Vegas Review-Journal about this roster when we get the roster news tomorrow, where Chris and I are proven 100% right. I wish. No, we won't be. I'm sure we'll miss on one or two. But he'll be on, as well as Mick Akers on the new stadium parking and Tommy White from the Las Vegas Stadium Authority Board to talk about the progress on the stadium. Chris, man, thank you so much. I know that we'll have some stuff for you on the website. And don't forget to follow Chris. Most of the people listening probably already do because he's one of the best guys to follow in Raider Nation. It's Chris Reed _NFL to follow him on Twitter, and he's always breaking down tapes and doing that, and we certainly appreciate his contribution. Chris, I'm sure we will have you on the radio show next week, so I appreciate you being on and being a part of the show tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gully.
All right, man. Well, that has been the 60th. Yes, the 60th. We reached a little milestone. The 60th podcast here for Silver and Black today. We started off as Las Vegas Raiders Report, but this is the 60th, so it is a good one. It is on the eve of the final cuts and the roster selection for the 53 that will be your Oakland Raiders for 2018. Join us Sunday from 8 to 10 a.m. If you're not in Las Vegas, download the radio.com app and do that. We will also have lots of fresh content on the website. Make sure you check out silverandblacktoday.com as well. For Chris Reed, I am Scott Gulbransen. This has been the Silver and Black Today podcast. As always, thank you all for listening. Without all of you, we don't do this, so we appreciate it. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next time.